Welcome, everybody, to House General and Housing. Today is Wednesday, May 7th. We are going to hear a bill that's due to us that we've just really started working on. And it's an act relating to protecting workers from extreme temperatures in the workplace. And the committee voted to take this off the wall, and today we're doing a walkthrough and an initial committee discussion. We will subsequently take testimony. Here's us. Joe?
When this went from the short form that we have on the wall to 8 pages?
This was we instructed Sophie to draft a bill, the long form of the bill, and she has. It also was a Senate bill, and she was working for them on preparing a long form. And this is her initial presentation.
So
What's up?
It's-
Let's go.
this is something you worked with the drafters of the short form on, of this short form?
So Sophie Sadowny for the Office of Legislative Counsel. So yes, and there was testimony from Curtis Clough from the Teamsters, I believe last week on the bill. And I was asked to, the committee voted to turn the short form into a long form. And it has now been introduced on the Senate side as S-153.
Actually, this is of immense comfort to me.
This is what it's.
I just genuinely haven't seen the how we go from the short form to this without us doing anything.
Well, we did, what happened was, just to clarify, is a while back, we asked Sophie what's going on with this short form when it first came up.
Okay.
And Sophie said that she had found that it was actually quite complicated, quite complex, because as I think she'll tell you, she said the federal equivalent was only dealt with high temperatures, and we wanted both high and low. And so she would work on it, and she was working on it for the Senate, but then we instructed her. We voted yesterday. Well, no, we took testimony, one piece of testimony, and yesterday voted to instruct her to prepare the long form, which she was already working on, and this is the result.
So is this the work from this senator you were working with, or from?
Yeah, so this was a request that came in initially into this committee as a short form. It was submitted ahead of the deadline, but because of the complexity of doing it, the sponsor was comfortable with doing it as a short form originally.
Okay.
And so it was introduced, the sponsor came in, Representative Casey came in and testified about it.
Yeah.
Subsequently, I got a request on the Senate side. They don't do short forms, so I started working on the standard form draft for them. And then I think it was last week, I don't remember, it wasn't this week, but last week or whenever I was asked to do the long form for here as well. So they've kind of been going in tandem, the Senate side and here.
Okay.
Sophie, please proceed.
So because it is quite complex and it's all new, it's not amending any existing language, I thought it might be helpful just to do a PowerPoint to do it at a high level. And then if the committee wants, we can go through, but rather than just going through the density of 18 pages, I just thought it might be helpful to do an overview. So again, this is just an overview. It's not a detailed analysis. There are a couple of other things in the bill that aren't included in the PowerPoint, but I just thought the PowerPoint might be a helpful way in. Yeah. Set up the I had this happen last time. In advance. Of why.
Try your arrows.
Try your arrow. Oh, there we go. Okay.
I have that problem sometimes.
Yeah, it's, just as hesitant for a moment. So these are just the different sections that are in the bill. So again, just going through, and my plan was not to sort of read through the whole thing, but the goal, again, under the purpose, the language is that thousands of workers become sick from occupational exposure to extreme hot and cold temperatures each year, and many of them die. And nearly 3 out of 4 workers who die from exposure to extreme temperatures in the workplace die in the first week of their employment before they've had an opportunity to acclimatize to the conditions. Employers are currently required to provide workplaces free of known health and safety hazards. And this includes protecting employees from temperature-related hazards. So there is currently, under the law that employers are required to provide, healthy and safe workplaces. So, the request has been to come up with something to address specifically extremes of temperature in the workplace.
So the 3 out of 4 workers who die in the first week, et cetera, all of that is happening despite the fact that it's already required that people provide.
Right, I mean, there's what's called the general duty clause that under OSHA that employees currently have.
These OSHA stats.
No, so this bill, for drafting it, so it came from a draft from the advocates supporting the bill. And then also looking at, there was, under the Biden administration, there was an extreme heat rulemaking process that was in place. There's a public hearing scheduled on that for June 15th. I don't know if that's going to continue moving ahead, but that deals just with extreme heat. And then I also looked at the National Institution of Occupational Safety and Health, NIOSH. They had some information around extreme cold. So in the bill, it's a combination of what was requested from the advocate side and then looking at some of the federal guidance that's out there. All right, there are many definitions in here. I just wanted to flag a couple of them for you on the PowerPoint. So one is the definition of employee includes all the people one would normally consider to be employees, but the proposed bill also includes individuals who are on a work site. So whether that's through a staffing agency, a contractor, subcontractor, or a delivery service. So it's really to provide a safe work site, not just for the employees of the employer, but for others that are coming onto the site. And you'll see as we go through this, signs and symptoms of extreme temperature-related illnesses and injuries and heat emergency, those are all defined in the definitions. And then there's also this term that will be used, and I'm using the abbreviations in the PowerPoint, but WBGT, which is a wet bulb globe temperature, which is a thermometer you can use that you put in direct sunlight to really measure heat. And it's a heat metric that it's not just like doing the heat index, which is sort of the outside temperature and then the humidity. This also is looking at ambient temperature, humidity, radiant heat from sunlight, and air movement. So it has a number of different categories that are looked at. And I have more information on that if anyone's interested, that I'd be happy to send to them, because it was something I was not familiar with before, but particularly through the American Meteorological Society and weather.gov. I mean, they have a lot of information on this wet bulb globe temperature, but that's for the heat, on the heat side of things, that's the thermometer and the temperature that's used. And then for cold, it's just a straight up temperature on a regular thermometer. So the Act proposes that this would cover all employers, employees, and employment in or at a workplace in Vermont, but then it lists out, not the following. And so, not workplaces where there's no reasonable expectation of the temperatures being above 80 degrees or below 60 degrees Fahrenheit, or where employees are only have very short exposures to extremes, or firefighting emergency response where they're already covered by existing federal and state laws and regulations, or for employees who are working remotely and they're choosing whether they're working. or if you have sedentary work activities indoor. So if your workforce sort of falls into those categories, then these requirements are not going to apply to you.
Well, the sedentary work. I mean, first of all, for example, are we doing sedentary work?
Yep.
This is sedentary, right?
Sedentary as it gets.
The definition on page 5, line 3, sedentary work activities at indoor work areas that only involve some combination of the following: sitting, occasional standing and walking for brief periods of time, and occasional lifting of objects weighing less than 10 pounds.
So if you're doing sedentary work, then this whole thing doesn't apply.
It says this subchapter shall not apply to employers whose employees all exclusively perform activities described in subdivisions A1 through A6, and these are the ones that are listed here. So the Act would require employers to develop an extreme temperature prevention plan, and then this lists out what those what would need to be in the plan. Well, it also requires that a thermometer be displayed in the workplace. So that would be your wet bulb, globe temperature thermometer for outdoor places, and then for indoor or when you're dealing with cold, but it would be just a regular thermometer. And the employers need to create an extreme temperature injury and illness prevention plan with worksite specific information and that identifies the covered work activities, the risk factors, the policies and procedures, the education and training that's available to employees, and emergency response and contact information. And employers are required to update the plan at least annually and whenever there's a major change to work conditions. So if, again, if the work conditions are changing, then they need to update the plan. Or if there's a serious incident that's involving extreme temperature, and then maybe they need to go back and revise their plan to, how do we make it better? How do we make sure that a situation like that doesn't happen again? And it needs to be available to employees, readily available to employees at their work sites. So the heat injury and illness prevention identifies the steps to be taken, and again, using that WBET measurement when it exceeds 80 degrees Fahrenheit. And then again, in the bill, it lists out the sort of things that need to be taken, and those include effective means of communication with supervisors. So again, I think a lot of this is contemplating people that are working outdoors that aren't necessarily, just down the hall from their supervisor, but are remote, making sure that they're in close communication with supervisors. They have access to cool and potable water, that they have access to a break area where they can cool down, that provides shade that's readily accessible, and the size is large enough to accommodate the number of employees that are taking a break or need to take a break. If personal protective equipment is provided, it needs to maintain its cooling properties. And if this also covers individuals, whose jobs are either in vehicles or spend a large portion of their day in vehicles, they need to have functioning air conditioning in their vehicles to make sure that, again, they're not overheating. And the employer should be encouraging their employees to request preventative breaks of not less than 10 minutes as needed. If they're taking a break, if an employee needs to take a break because they're not feeling well, they need to be monitored, and then any break they take would be compensable. So it can't be, oh, that was your rest period. So it's compensable if they're taking a break.
I have a few questions.
Yes.
Can we define work vehicle?
Yes.
I guess my question is, there are instances where a workplace does not provide a vehicle, but may provide reimbursement for mileage. Is the employer responsible for ensuring that all work is up to par on an individual's personal vehicle?
So work vehicle is defined as meaning a car, truck, van, or other authorized means of transporting vehicles or goods. I think the intent here is to cover, again, like delivery vehicles, people that are working, in their work site is their vehicle. There's no language in here right now that talks about personal vehicles, like if you're using your personal vehicle as your work site. So that's not something that's included in this at the moment.
Right. And then monitored. Does that mean that the employer has to, is liable? I mean, at this point, it sounds like for the bill, if an employee, it needs to be monitored. I guess maybe this is more for committee discussion. I guess I'm just, what does monitoring look like?
That's in.
Perfect, I'll stop.
But also everyone, as I go, I mean, I have a lot of questions as I go about this, like, was this a good idea or about a good idea? And I'm making a list of them and I suggest you guys do the same. I mean, this is a draft, you know, we can work with this draft. I mean.
I have an 18-page list currently.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Okay. I mean, keep notes of what your doubts are. Okay.
All right, and then there's additional language. So if the temperature exceeds 90 degrees Fahrenheit at a work site, an employer must provide at least a 15-minute paid rest break every 2 hours in the cool down break area. And if the temperature exceeds 100 degrees Fahrenheit, they need to provide at least a 10-minute paid rest break every hour.
Is that in addition to paid lunch and paid breaks?
Yes. And then when the temperatures are that high, so either 90 or 100 degrees, the employer needs to remind employees to drink water, to take breaks, remind them what the signs and symptoms are of heat-related injuries, illnesses, how to seek help, and the location of break areas and of water. And again, this is, I think, also contemplating people who are working on a mobile work site, you know, just reminding them of where they can go and get water and take a break. Sorry, I just coughed. So going to Representative Bartley's question, the bill also describes what sort of monitoring looks like. So close observation of employees for signs and symptoms of heat-related illness or emergency. So either a mandatory buddy system, so where employees are observing each other, a supervisor is observing, but can't observe more than 20 individuals at any one time. And then if you have employees that are working alone, that they're in two-way communication with a supervisor every 2 hours.
That's if they're in these extreme conditions or generally.
Right, that's if they're in these extreme conditions.
Okay, all right.
Doesn't want to move forward. Don't know why. Here we go. Okay, and then we touched on before about acclimatization. So this is for those working in extreme temperatures. But again, it's the goal is that you have people gradually increase the amount of time that they're in those situations where they're exposed to extreme heat. And then this is what the bill proposes, that if you're a new employee, you gradually work up during that first week. So 20% of the normal work shift exposure day one, 40%, 60%, 80%, and then day 5, you'd be at 100%. And then the same thing, but on a slightly accelerated schedule for employees who return to work after they've been absent for more than 14 days. And then switching over to cold injury and illness prevention, the step to be taken when the temperature is below 60 degrees Fahrenheit. And again, some of this is going to be repetitive, but effective means of communication with the supervisor, access to cool potable water, a warm-up break area that's warm, draft-free, that warm beverages are available, and that there's a space where employees can change out of wet clothes. And again, to encourage employees to request preventative warm-up breaks of not less than 10 minutes as needed. They would be monitored and it would be compensable. And again, that if you're in a work vehicle, that it has functioning heat to keep folks warm. And again, if the temperature drops below 40 degrees Fahrenheit at a work site, and again, these are the temperatures that are used for the heat injury illness prevention are the pretty standard ones that are in the federal proposed rules and what other states do. On the cold side, we don't have those same precedents. But But so at the moment, it says if temperature drops below 40 degrees Fahrenheit at a work site, again, you must provide at least a 15-minute paid rest break every 2 hours in the warm-up break area. If the employer is providing personal protective equipment, if it becomes wet, the individual needs to be removed from the work site and not returned to work until either the items have dried out or been replaced. Again, the close observation of employees to see if they're exhibiting any signs or symptoms of cold-related illness. And then again, the same mandatory buddy system as for supervisor observation. And if somebody's working by themselves, that they're in communication with their supervisor. And if the temperature drops below 30 degrees Fahrenheit, then employees are to be reminded of their right to take rest breaks and the precautionary steps that should be taken. So the emergency, sorry. Keep moving things on my screen here. So the emergency response plan, these are the items that need to be included. So again, emergency phone numbers, how to reach a supervisor, what to do if you need to transport an employee to a place where they can be reached by an emergency medical provider, clear and precise directions to the location in the event you have to give that information to a dispatcher. Any immediate action that needs to be taken, again, if somebody's suffering from an extreme heat or extreme cold, you know, what steps can be taken to reduce or increase the employee's body temperature depending on what they're experiencing. And then for those employees who do experience signs or symptoms of heat or cold related illness, they need to be relieved from duty, they need to be monitored, they should not be left alone, and then they should be offered first aid. It's been weird today, but it is. Okay. And then the employer is required to provide education and training to employees at no cost in a language and at a literacy level that each employee understands. And then the things that it needs to cover, again, symptoms and signs of temperature-related injuries and illnesses, the risk factors, so things like physical exertion, clothing, personal protective equipment, lack of acclimatization, and then personal risk factors such as an individual's age, health, alcohol consumption, and certain medications that the role those can play. And then again, education and training around the importance of using their personal protective equipment, taking preventative breaks, drinking water and being hydrated, and making sure the employee reports any signs or symptoms they're experiencing themselves, or if they see a coworker suffering and having those issues. Employees need to be educated about where they can access the extreme temperature protection plan, and employees need to be advised about their right to the protections available under the Act and that they're protected from retaliation. Supplemental training for employees. So again, if their individual job duties change, if the employee hasn't, or if the company's policies change, if the individual's job duties change, if the employee hasn't retained the information, or if you're anticipating a significant heat wave or a significant drop in temperature. And then supervisors need to be trained on the topics we just covered, as well as the company's policies and procedures for monitoring temperatures and adjusting work protocols as necessary. And again, employers should be encouraging employees to solicit their input on administrative controls and engineering controls that could help limit exposure to temperature-related hazards. That's it, but my thing seems to not want to move forward, but I think that's the last one. The proposed effective date is May 1 of 2027. The anticipation being that it would not get through this session, but May 1 would be the start of the summer construction season in 27. I don't know if I can get out of this now. There you go.
Do you have a question or you have thought?
I have a question.
Okay. Sophie, is that the end of your,
I think so, yes. I wouldn't advance any further, but I'm pretty sure that was the last one.
and maybe we should, what are your thoughts? Should we have a little discussion question Or should we walk through this before, what people's pleasure?
I just thought it might be helpful to have an understanding, big
Yeah.
picture of where it was going before doing that.
So why is this going into statute and not, why is VOSHA not handling this?
So my understanding is that VOSHA is very under-resourced in this state. It's very tiny. And so it really does not do rulemaking. Historically, what VOSHA does is it takes federal rules and then incorporates those then become the state rules. But yeah, at the federal level, this was contemplated to be a rule. And the other states that have some similar kinds of bills, it's usually done rulemaking through their Department of Labor or whatever their equivalent is called.
So do we have any department? I mean,
I mean,
It's
that may
not-
be something to ask the Department of Labor about.
So I think we should get in DOL for sure, and probably get somebody from BOSHA as well.
But we're gonna do a walkthrough, right?
Oh, yeah.
But there are some inconsistencies between the slides. So like in the bill, it says 80 degrees and 10-minute breaks, as opposed to the 90 degrees or 15-minute breaks that were in the slides.
Yeah, I think there's some different places in here.
Okay. Okay.
Just waiting for the film to get back.
So if I don't know if I can get out of that. Where do we go?
Is there a threshold in the? That is, there's no size threshold of the company.
Right.
Okay.
Do you want me to walk through the bill itself?
Yeah, I think it's probably worth it because I think people have questions, they're gonna have a lot of questions, and we might as well know what's in the bill. I mean, I don't think you have to go through every line, but, and people are gonna have to decide whether they want to read the bill carefully. This point.
So this would be adding a subchapter to where currently the BOSHA rules are. So this would be inserted into that section of Title 21. Again, it lists the proposed purpose, the definitions, explaining what acclimatization, ambient temperature, and then it lists out the cold-related injuries and illnesses, some of the examples of what those kinds of injuries and illnesses are, and then what the symptoms are. Listed in here. Employee we touched on before, but again, this is an expansive.
Before we go much further, because you had findings which you put in there. Did your work include any, I mean, this is probably something we'd have to get from witnesses, but did your work include any review of how frequent a problem this is,
In Vermont?
or elsewhere, or generally, nationally, or otherwise?
No, this was information that was provided to me, but in terms of for inclusion in the bill.
Okay.
So, I mean, I previously shared with the committee what I found in terms of what other states have done, and, you know, again, primarily rulemaking, but it covers like specific injuries, covers, you know, indoor, or covers just outdoor, you know, so there's no one state has something that's identical to this. My understanding is the draft that was shared with me was something that I'm sure other legislatures are being asked to consider, but I haven't seen how they formulated their proposals.
Go ahead.
Okay, so again, that was just a description of the cold, the employees, the more expansive definition. And again, employer would just, again, covers the wide range of employers, heat-related injuries and illnesses. And then there's a definition of indoors and outdoors, outdoors being an area that is not indoors, which is very helpful. But, you know, again, it goes through signs and symptoms of a heat emergency. And then signs and symptoms of a heat-related illness. The wet bulb probe temperature that we talked about, and work vehicle. And then application is the employers that this would apply to. So right now it's drafted is that it would apply with respect to all employers, employees and employment in or at a workplace in the state of Vermont, except it shall not apply to the following, and these were the ones that we went through before. But again, if there's no expectation that employees are going to be, outside of that 80 to 60-degree range, or only have short duration exposures, or they're already covered by state or federal rules or regulations, or where they're working indoors or in vehicles where the air conditioning and heating systems are keeping the temperature in that range, or they're working remotely at a place of the employee's choosing, and they're working on these, very sedentary jobs. And then subsection B says the subchapter shall not apply to employees whose employees all exclusively perform activities described in subdivisions A1 through 6 above. And this is going through the extreme temperature prevention plan. So again, employees being required to display a thermometer at each indoor and outdoor work site and in work vehicles to monitor the temperature. And then developing a plan and then going through the elements that must be included in the plan. So a comprehensive list of the types of work activities covered by the plan, information about the factors that can increase the likelihood of injury or illness, actions to be taken to reduce the likelihood of injury or illness, all the policies and procedures necessary to comply with the act, information on education and training, and then that emergency response procedure and contact information. And again, the frequency with which the plan needs to be updated. And then this goes into the injury and illness prevention. And so these are the steps anytime the work site is above 80 degrees Fahrenheit. So again, making sure that employees can contact a supervisor when necessary if they've got concerns about the heat, and providing the water, drinkable water, providing an area where employees can cool down, and a description of what's required for that.
Is this list ands or, are they ands? The employer has to do all of this?
Right, for the rest areas, yes. So either under, for outdoor areas, it needs to be sufficient in size to accommodate the number of employees on break and provide either natural shade or air conditioning. And then for indoor work sites, a break area that's air conditioned and if appropriate, dehumidified and can accommodate the number of employees on break and is readily accessible. So it's divided up between indoor and outdoor.
Here's the question. For that definition of, or saying that it has to be able to accommodate anybody who's on break. If we're assuming that 80 degrees is too hot and it's gonna cause people to need this break, we could also assume that at the same time that most people are gonna be affected by that. So hypothetically, you're going to need a space large enough for every single employee at the same time.
Yeah.
Is that a crazy?
Stagger their start times
You can
by 15
slide.
minutes.
Is there any exemption here for agriculture?
No,
Yeah, I was wondering the same thing.
What about schools that don't have AC?
Breaks.
Okay, that's.
Brainchild, somebody who's done it for work, they're affecting.
Okay,
and again, the employer must encourage employees to request preventative cool down breaks of not less than 10 minutes as needed. And then when they take a break, they need to be monitored for symptoms. If they do exhibit any symptoms, then they need to have either first aid or emergency response. And then they're encouraged to remain in the area until the cool down area until their symptoms have abated. And again, if the preventative rest period coincides with an unpaid meal break, then the rest period will be considered a compensable work assignment. Again, if the employer provides the personal protective equipment, then they must make sure that it works, that it's maintained. And if it says, to your question earlier, Representative Bartley, employees must provide work vehicles with functioning air conditioning. So again, I'm not entirely sure what that would mean if they're relying on the employee to provide it.
Can I ask a question, Tom? Provide your employees for vehicles?
Do I apply vehicles?
Do I,
Yeah, do you supply employee vehicles?
For their personal use or even just
For
crew, like
work.
crew? We have 2 work trucks,
How many employees do you have?
5 if they're all there.
Thank you, that's helpful for me.
And then this gets into the acclimatization protocol that we touched on for new employees and for returning employees. And then this goes to what Representative Lamont was talking about. So again, if the temperature exceeds 90 degrees, then the amount of the break, now it's required that employees have at least a 15-minute paid rest break every 2 hours in the cool down break area. And then if it's over 100 degrees, that it's at least a 10-minute paid rest break every hour in the cool down break area. And again, this talks about the monitoring. So being observed for signs and symptoms of heat-related illness or heat emergency. So either with a mandatory buddy system where co-workers observe each other, or observation by a supervisor or a designated observer, but no more than 20 employees being observed by one individual. And then for those employees who are working by themselves, effective two-way communication between the employee and the supervisor, contact every. In addition, if the temperature is above 90 degrees, then the employer must notify employees of the following: the importance of drinking plenty of water, the right to take breaks, a reminder of what the signs and symptoms are, how to seek help if they need it, and then for mobile work sites, the location of break areas and drinking water. That's into the cold injury and illness prevention. So the steps to be taken when the temperature at a work site, and again, could be indoors or outdoors, falls below 60 degrees Fahrenheit. Again, having that effective means of communication with a supervisor.
Sorry to interrupt. Is it okay? It's just, so now we're entering into the stuff that is somewhat covered federally?
No, this is the stuff that's not. So typically,
Heat is covered.
heat is covered,
Oh,
but
heat,
not
but
cold.
not cold. I'm so sorry. Okay.
And again, providing access to water. And again, a break area that's sufficient in size to accommodate the number of employees on break, a warm and draft seat free setting, a warm beverage, and places to change out of wet clothes. And again, the employer must be encouraging employees to request preventative warm-up breaks of not less than 10 minutes as needed. And then employees who take those breaks should be monitored for cold stress. And then this lists some of the risk factors for cold stress: so wet or damp clothing, inadequate clothing, exhaustion. And then if anyone's exhibiting those signs or symptoms, again, they need first aid or an emergency response. And they should be encouraged to remain in the warm-up area until any signs or symptoms of cold-related illness have abated. And again, it should be compensable. And again, for work vehicles, that they've got sufficient heat. And when the temperature at the worksite drops below 40 degrees Fahrenheit, these are the additional steps. So that's providing at least a 15-minute rest break every 2 hours in the warm-up break area. And again, your personal protective equipment is making sure that if it gets wet, that employees are immediately removed from the work site, taken to a warm-up area and not returned until the equipment's been dried or replaced. And then I didn't include this on previously, but if employers need to take into account the risk factors for an employee's heat load when wearing personal protective equipment in cold temperatures. Again, that same thing in terms of observation, either the mandatory buddy system, observation by a supervisor or a designated observer, and then contact every 2 hours with employees who are working alone. And if the temperature is below 30 degrees Fahrenheit, reminding employees of their right to take rest breaks as needed, what the signs and symptoms are, how to seek help, and for mobile work sites where the break areas and drinking water are located. We come on to the emergency response plan, and this just lists out the elements that need to be included in the emergency response plan. So phone numbers, how to contact a supervisor and emergency medical services, a description of how to transport employees to a place where they can be reached by an emergency medical provider, clear and precise directions in the event they need to be given to a emergency dispatcher, procedures for responding to an employee experiencing signs and symptoms of heat-related or cold-related illness. And then if someone is experiencing those signs and symptoms, they need to be relieved from duty, they need to be monitored, they need to not be left alone, and they need to be given either first aid or medical services on site. And if it's an emergency, then obviously you've got to take immediate action to reduce their or increase their body temperature, depending on what the situation is, and contact emergency medical services immediately. And again, if they're receiving first aid or medical services, they're to be considered as on duty for compensation purposes. Education and training. There needs to be an effective education program at no cost to employees. Again, that covers the symptoms and signs of the injuries and illnesses, the risk factors, the importance of removing, personal protective equipment if it's actually going to impair your ability to cool down or heat up, depending on the situation, the importance of taking rest breaks, drinking water and staying hydrated, and where you can find the break areas in the water, the importance of reporting any signs and symptoms that the employee is experiencing or that they're observing in their co-workers, the emergency plan, how to access the employee's extreme temperature protection plan, and then reminding employees of their right to the protections under the Act, including protection from retaliation. And then the training will be provided at least annually to new employees on hire, and at least annually, and then the materials are available to employees upon request. Supplemental training whenever an employee's job duties change that affects their exposure, the employer's policies or procedures change, there's an indication the employee has not retained the necessary information, or there's an anticipated heat wave or significant drop in temperature. And then the employer must also ensure that each supervisor responsible for supervising employees receives training and understands topics we just went through, the employer's policies and procedures for monitoring temperature and humidity conditions so that they can adjust the work protocols as needed, the procedures to be followed if an employee does exhibit any signs or symptoms of a heat-related or cold-related illness. Training must be provided in a language and at a literacy level that each employee understands, and employees must be given the opportunity to ask questions and receive answers about the training.
Is the employer, so I have a few questions regarding this and like the education training. So is the employer supposed to know what their employees' literacy level is? Like who has that responsibility, the employee or the employer?
I think the important thing is to make sure that the employees are understanding the information.
Okay. But we've said that VOSHA doesn't really do rules making. So do you have, like, would it be our responsibility to come up with who would write that training? Or is that going to be the responsibility of the employer?
It would be the responsibility of the employer.
And then the risk factors, physical exertion, clothing, PPE, age, health, alcohol consumption, certain medications. As an employer, there is no way I would ever touch that. Like that is opening the employer up for loads of liability. And I guess I'm concerned that an employer would then have to ask their employees specifically, what medications are you taking?
I think the goal is to provide to let employees know that if you get very tired, if you're not feeling well, if you're taking certain medications that can impact your ability to function well in heat or cold. I don't think it's
General
what meds
information.
are you on. It's more, if you take alcohol, if you're, dehydrated and stuff, that can play a role. So I think it's more providing that general information. So people understand their personal risk factors. It's not the employer's job to check on their individual risk factors. It's to make sure they're aware that these are risk factors if you're working in extreme heat or extreme cold.
I'm gonna just give you, I guess it's a question really. I'm just not sure. But will I'm sorry.
Sorry, can we follow up on that? Because that point of the risk factors appears not in the education section. It appears in the cold injury and illness prevention section. So it does put the onus on the employers. It's part of the employer must, employer must, employer must. So I don't know that it is not imposing this on the employer. It's not like this, it's assuming that the employer.
I think
Just
the
take
employer's
into
job
account
is
the
to make
risk.
sure that the employees understand what their risks are.
Oh, well, I just, as written, it's employer must provide suitable personal protective equipment. Employers must, at the top of page 13, it's employers in considering necessary protective equipment, employers must take into account risk factors for an employee's heat load when wearing. Oh, no, I'm sorry, that's the different. Yeah, take into account risk factors, so it's like the employer would have to know when giving out this protective equipment, what the risk factors are. I get that it'd be. It would make sense that you would have to educate employees on speaking up about any risk factors that they might be living under, but I think that the way it's written, there's an assumption that I guess if employers haven't been made aware of risk factors, something like that would be necessary. I don't, or is that assumed?
Is this like saying to like equivalent to like the posting of the mandates in the break rooms or something? Like, what would this look like? Like, is that what this means? Does this mean the employer must inform them by posting these warnings?
Yeah, that makes sense.
You know,
So I think it's that it's included in the plan that's available to employees, but then there's a requirement that if you know the temperatures are dropping or if the temperature is going to be really high, that you're reminding employees of those things. So if you know it's going to be a very hot day or a very cold day, that you might have that information posted and available, but you're just reminding the employees too, that that's part of this, that there's just that sort of ongoing reminder is just, on this.
I have a rather large concern about this, which I'm not sure how addressing this. I mean, I think this is excellent in that it is encyclopedic. That is, it has everything in it that I could think of to protect employees. There are one or two areas where I might feel like it could be stricter, but they're rather limited. The problem is, I feel like while this might work for a company that has 500 employees, I'm not sure that, I think somehow we're going to have to adjust this to Vermont in many ways. I mean, I can think right off the top of my head of so many professions here where, I won't get into it. So many situations and professions where it would be very awkward to impose this kind of extensive requirement and might not even work. I think there's no question we should take testimony and on this, but I'm wondering how we work our way to an approach which addresses the issue of extreme heat and extreme cold in ways that various small and medium-sized, in ways that work for Vermont, which is almost entirely very small and medium-sized companies. And I'm just not sure how we do that. I mean, I made a list of things, that we could bring up and say to Sophie, will you write your way around this one or the other? But I think for me, it's not bad to have this. I mean, I didn't frankly dream of all the different things that are in here, but I haven't had any experience with this before. But I think somehow we have to find our way to to be able to do that and address people's concerns. One way to do it is through committee discussion, I think, where people on the committee can talk through what their problems are, and you could talk through possible solutions. And then inform council of what our concerns are, and she can, work on another draft. But anyway, that's before I plunged into any, specific thing, that was just a general reaction I had. And I'd like to know how other people would like to feed and what you're doing. You've been looking bemused the entire time.
Oh, I was gonna be nice to Sophie and wait till she's not in the room and then I'll.
Legal questions is what he's trying to say. So many legal questions.
It's just, just walking through. This is terrible.
And
No, just, but to be clear, weather-related illnesses and injuries are lethal and very serious.
Question is what to do
The
about it.
question, yes, and the there are, and I'm sure there are people that are just compelled to work in awful situations without the right protection or gear, but that sounds like the 19th century to me. Farmers have been working in these situations for hundreds of years. And they know enough to drink water or to go get warm. I see in here a lot of things that need definition. Am I providing long underwear and mittens to all my employees? Am I making hot chocolate every morning? Below 60 and above 80, that's an apartment. That's not a workplace. You have giant barns are not heated, but they're indoors. So they're not going to meet. I don't know how we're going to make that meet indoor criteria, but in here, the only definition of indoors includes a lot of places that I wouldn't necessarily consider an indoor workplace. And I am not writing another written plan for anything. This is a matter of good education. It's a matter of good workplace safety, training. I don't think this belongs in statute. I think it's just, don't be stupid. I can't, I'm a little exasperated that we have to tell people in statute to do this. An air conditioner in every vehicle. To tell General Motors they need to put one in a work truck, because what they call a work truck is very basic. It barely has a radio. Okay, I have a work truck that is built 1988, never had an air conditioner, it has vent windows, which actually work better if you're moving. I'm looking at, and if there's not an exemption for farmers and foresters, why don't we just round them up and euthanize them? It would be jumper. This is just, that's it. Where are they gonna haul it out everywhere?
This is a discussion, but I don't think, I think we asked her to produce something, she did, and it's a.
I know, and I was gonna be nice.
It's encyclopedic.
Didn't wait.
So I don't think
You
you're
release the
attacking
floodgates.
Sophie. This is a start. Just think
Yeah.
it is a start. And actually, Tom,
Bit much.
what I think we ought to do actually is appoint a committee of one. Take this and come up with a solution that works for a month. And no, you can't just rip it up.
Well, Well, I think there's a place for, if we're saying employers must know this stuff, convey this stuff, have this plan, that they should all have an AED, should all have stop the bleed kits, they should all have first aid training, they should all have, they should all have nutritionists on staff in case people don't know enough to feed themselves well when they're home. I mean, why are employers not asked to give them nutritious lunch? I'm looking for the tipping point between what is somewhere in here, there's a reasonable tipping point where workplace safety is a real issue.
I could easily think, I can tell you, I could easily think of a short list of things that employers really have to do. And I agree with you, I don't think the temperatures are right, but I could see a short list of things they ought to do, and it's a hell of a lot shorter than what's here.
Yeah.
But, okay, others, yes, Joe.
I'm just curious how this would work on job sites with 5, 6, 7 trades on them.
I'm sorry, with
5 or 6, 7 trades on one job site.
Yeah, uh-huh.
Is my thermometer good for some other company? Or can they just say, oh, we're using Valley Floors thermometer as a thermometer on the job site today? Or do I have 7 thermometers there because every company has to have one? Like you said, if it's every 2 hours, it's a 20-minute break for everyone. Where's that space for 20 people to just go sit in the shade or be in an AC area?
Yeah, if we're talking about the expensive housing,
This
this
is,
is 25% of the labor cost on site.
yeah,
That's a lot.
when are you gonna build it? You're on break, you're at lunch, or you're taking a cool down break? By the end of and you traveled there and you traveled home. By the time you're done, you worked at the job for 3 hours. Like, we wonder why we have a housing shortage.
Well, this isn't the law yet.
I know, but
Blame it on,
I know,
don't
but
blame it on this.
it's years and years of just these
Area
little,
that-
it's just this little small thing. We're just doing this
I
little
think
thing
somebody
here.
has answered the
There's
question.
20 of those,
What would finally
well,
get
and when we compound 20 of those little things.
Let's just do certified payroll, call it a day.
I could see if we were talking about above 90 and under 10 degrees.
Yeah, there are some extremes where you just need to stop working because it isn't safe, period.
I think it's a matter of common sense. I mean, an employer is not gonna send somebody out when it's over 100 degrees. I mean, you have to put yourself in your
It's not.
employee's place, and sometimes they're working right next to the employee. Now, when I worked for the utility Central Vermont Public Service in the safety department, we had safety meetings once a month, and we had programs. We had first aid, we had line worker programs, we had ergonomics. You know, we had different programs, but you know, I don't know how a small employer could monitor all of these, you know, the temperature, the this, the that, the this, the that, you know, does somebody have a heart condition and they're working, but you don't know they have a heart condition? Should they be out in the heat? No, I mean, I think it's an awful lot, but generally, I mean, sometimes there are employees that are put in situations that are dangerous.
Company,
but
you know, supervisors might not know their employees all that well.
true.
You know, it's something that you probably should screen. You know, because you're gathering what, I mean, when you onboard somebody, you need emergency contacts, you need some of that information.
But also,
It's
like,
worth asking.
if the supervisors have I think a lot of times, this is just my opinion, and maybe it's a committee discussion, but like, it's employer's responsibility, it's the employer's responsibility. I think we need to talk about bodily autonomy, and at some point, the employee has to take responsibility for something. You gotta watch the news and know what the weather is. We live in Vermont. Are the roads gonna be awful? I mean,
So
it just,
there are moments when I
think
drive
that's
by.
part of distinguishing what the employee is responsible for and what the employer is responsible for.
I agree. I just don't think it's the bill. And I just really quickly, I do want to say, Sophie, as always, I am completely in awe of your work. I think I've said that like since the first time I saw your notes from the Ag Labor Study Committee, and my frustration is with the bill itself and not the rate of the bill. So I
understand.
I really just needed to say that out loud, because
I have 180 clients in my job.
I know, and you are amazing, and that's why I just want to say thank you for your work.
Yes. go
Yeah,
ahead.
thank you. That was, and so I was circling back because I should have written it down, but I didn't, and I usually do, but the numbers, the math in here, like where did that math come from? For those, like the hour and the 10 minutes and the 2 hours and how did that play out? Who calculated that?
So this was a combination of information that was provided to me by the advocates, and then looking at the federal heat prevention rules,
Yeah,
and then looking at the NIOSH code.
And there is some parallel to sports medicine.
okay.
Within the numbers when doing it, but
Yes,
So the 60 degrees,
On the cold side, that's not from the federal because there isn't a federal analog.
that's hot.
I think that I'm just gonna reflect back some concerns I'm hearing, okay? If I can use concerns to
Please do.
characterize to characterize. Okay, I'm just gonna break these down. One is we have concerns that they're really different capabilities, different reasonable standards to impose on different kinds of employers. Big employers versus there's the small employer problem. Another concern is we have a lot of experience here with outdoor work, whether it's farming or utility, whatever it is. We just have a lot of experience here with outdoor work. And it's hard to project this kind of a complete regulatory system on a lot of the outdoor work that we see. It just doesn't make sense. Another problem is just what I would consider a visceral reaction among some of us, that it's like the nanny state. It's just too much taking care of people, that goes too far in that direction. Another concern is that some just requiring plans and reports. And then, that's a real imposition. And I'll add even that there are two problems with plans and reports that have come out of the discussion so far. One problem is it's just too much to ask employers to do. They have enough, if not too much to do already, particularly small employers. That's one concern. I'm just lifting concern. Another concern is, and it's just useless because all it is a sheet of paper on the bulletin board in the back room that nobody reads, that it's like, who reads it? So, and that you have to do it every year. What do you do? Put up a new sheet of paper every year, stick on the bulletin board. So it's simultaneously, people think, maybe oppressive for the employer and useless. So there's that concern. I think I'm hearing concerns over, it's probably subsumed in what I said before, but I have to break it out. Concerned over the vehicle problem, particularly with respect to farming or a lot of outdoor work. I mean, it's true that one can buy air-conditioned tractors, but most of us here don't do that. Tom, I'm sure will replace his tractor with one with an air conditioner. Yeah, right. But that the vehicle issue and that just a lot of work here involves people's own vehicles, et cetera. I think I'm just looking. There's a real concern that we may have picked the wrong temperature. Or that we need to perhaps take some of the requirements that we had generally and ship them off to the extremes and do it that way. But there's some concern that what would be left is common sense, so we should leave it alone. I'm just trying to reflect. I'm not sure I agree with that, but there is that concern. I think there's a concern that there may be entire sectors that would have trouble complying because, like because Vermont has traditionally, for example, not been a very hot place, we have lots of buildings that just don't have air conditioning, like schools that just don't have air conditioning. Should they? Ideally, yes, but they don't. And what do we do about that? I think there's a concern that there may be entire sectors of work where people are usually working alone or for themselves or in small groups. And that may include farming, forestry, and other outdoor work. And I think there's a concern that training is a little difficult, like putting training obligation, particularly on small employers, realistic. That's my list of the concerns that I've heard so far. I think, but I wouldn't say, we have to hear testimony.
Yep.
I don't think we should put on Sophie yet. We shouldn't say to Sophie, will you produce
Change this
something
and
that's
change-
that's about 3 pages long and, starts at 100 degrees on one side and 20 degrees on the other. And we're not there, but we may get there. But I think we should take the testimony. That's my thought, and I'm curious how other people feel.
I would like,
Go for it.
no, you go, Joe.
Absolutely not.
Oh, take it. I just gonna say, I would like to hear testimony, and also, I think this is over prescriptive. And also, it is a crisis. We've heard some testimony so far about it. So I think as we hear testimony, if we're thinking about what maybe for Sophie in the background can be thinking about is, okay, we have a starting point. We're hearing it's over prescriptive. As we're going forward, can we see, I think a goal, a healthy goal is to see, okay, well, what can we do in a healthy way? I would like us to, all I'm saying is I don't want us to abandon it. So that was just to say, yes, we've heard this is an issue and it needs to be addressed, but this is over prescriptive a lot. So like, how can we, so what can we do? If not this, then what? Right.
One thing I think you could do, Sophie, I think it was Tom, I'm not sure who raised the whole issue of regulation, and you said they don't do that, could you at some point provide us, I think it would be good for the committee to see what do safety regulations look like out here in Vermont from VOSHA generally. And I'm not saying you have to give us the whole statute, but I think people ought to get a sense of what is the level in which safety regulations are dealt with here.
Yeah, I mean, essentially it's a cut and paste from the federal. So
Yeah.
the most recent ones that, that some of them are like crane operators or beryllium exposure. I mean, they can be very, very specific. I mean, they're provided, they go through the, legislative rules process and then to the Secretary of State's office, and they're all available online.
Well, somehow we ought to, one could argue that this is different than it's not specific as to sector, it's across the board. Are there other examples of across the board regulations?
So I mean,
that might be useful as an example.
yeah, so I can send to the committee if it's helpful, the OSHA, the proposed rulemaking that again, I don't know. It's still in the rulemaking process, so it's scheduled for public hearing June 15th, I believe. But that's where a lot of the structure of this came from, so it will look quite familiar when you look at that, but I can share that with you. I think it would be helpful to hear from the Department of Labor on rulemaking and what their capacity would be. Again, most of the other states that have some kinds of rules around extreme heat and stuff, it is through regulation and rule, it's not through statute. But it might be helpful to hear from the Department of Labor on.
Well, and could you just at least provide the site
Yes, I
to where we could look at what VOSHA safety regulations look like? Yes.
And also like what other states are doing.
I did send that to all of you.
I think a resend, I think it.
I'll resend it. I'll just send it.
We just were spread out and concerned with a few other items, like our housing bill. Let's see, who else had their hand up?
I'm good.
No, actually, I wanted to come back to you, because you were are you just feeling like, I just don't think there's any version of this that.
Maybe like a 2-pager that says use your friggin' head for 5
Yeah,
minutes.
but that anything like this is just too much from your perspective.
It's the opposite of light touch. Like I said, I mean, you want to talk about extreme temperatures, over 90, under 10.
Well, yeah,
Okay,
I
and we can talk
actually,
about
I
extreme
don't
temperature.
think that's crazy.
This, like, it's one of those things where like, sometimes it's like, don't judge a book by its cover, but when you open something up and you read it and you go like, whoever came up with this, have they ever done any work other than an office chair, ever?
Well, if it's sedentary, it wouldn't apply to me.
Well, people that have never done this,
You know.
legislating how it should be done for the people that do.
In that sedentary exemption.
It's,
I mean, are you telling me
For hot,
that if the temperature was 10 degrees in here, I would have no protection because
I
I'm
mean, think
sedentary?
about last year
that's gotta
when
be-
the AC went out in here and we all were very hot.
Yeah, we were.
We
sedentary.
lived.
Let
Yeah.
me see.
yeah, it's just, you open it up and it's like below 60 degrees and it's like, here's all your precautions.
Yeah.
Like 58 degrees is excellent working weather.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right.
Go talk to anyone who works outside, like, that is beautiful
I
weather.
think this is actually, I have to say, this is just so Vermont. It is.
Yeah, I know.
It's entire- I think if we filmed the last hour and sent it,
gold.
send it to like,
Gold.
send it to New York or, some city and said, what do you think of this, guys? Oh my God, these people are.
I don't think.
In the vice chair meeting today, somebody asked, like, what do you
Yeah.
do if
That's not what I said.
people on your committee are unwilling to say hard things online? I'm like, we don't have that problem. I'm like, can't help you there.
But, well, our witnesses hopefully won't be too intimidated. I think we have, but
So you
Yeah.
did,
anything else?
you did have testimony from Curtis Clough and Bridget Quinn.
Yeah.
Teamsters?
Right,
Yes.
right.
Last week.
Wait a minute, we had testimony from Curtis.
And Quinn Morris.
But we had no other testimony yet. have we?
Bridget Quinn. From, she's the legislative director from Joint Council 10 Teamsters,
Yeah.
all of New
Okay.
England. She was remote.
Yeah,
Oh,
so
right, yeah.
tomorrow we will have,
Casey Jennings.
Thank you.
Molly Marr.
Who are they from?
Casey Jennings is an individual who works for for one of the ski.
He testified during the
Yeah.
PAL 3 public hearing.
Yes.
And then Molly Marr is with she's the president of Ski Vermont. And then is David coming in tomorrow?
He said he didn't particularly have anything. So
Okay, and then I think somebody,
either Sarah or
no,
the
no.
president of
It-
AGC.
my understanding is it's going to be Ben Osha. Last name, actually Osha, coming in as the safety
Oh, good.
director of AGC. Trainer.
Agency of,
Sir,
Yeah,
was
Sarah.
that?
She was for a
She
second,
was.
but yeah, no, last name truly.
okay,
Osha.
is this gonna be
Yeah.
balanced quote? end
Yes.
quote? Okay. All right,
And where is, excuse me, but where is he from?
So-
AGC.
How is it
Association of
balanced?
General
It's all
Contractors.
Big
He
employers.
does a
was
lot,
the-
and he's the one that runs their training, their safety training programs.
Reason I asked is my husband sold his insurance business.
No.
Had worked with John Osha and his brother and,
Seems like there's a lot of them.
yeah, there must be.
That's what we did.
Are you looking for justice
Must be related.
against the
I'd
bill?
like to find
that's what
another
we did in
advocate, but
Casey
Yeah.
Jennings.
I think where this is gonna end up going is based off of what I've heard in discussion, it's sounding like this is less of a statute issue and more of a follow-up with what is in statute with OSHA and how we can, I think things will come to light during testimony. And we'll learn a lot and we'll get our solutions.
is VOSHA? I'm sorry, is VOSHA testifying?
We don't
No.
have DOL or VOSHA yet.
Okay,
can,
we
though.
have to get DOL and VOSHA, okay. All right. Are there any other pithy remarks that?
Pithy remarks time.
Yeah, we should go see if the guy's working construction right down the road here. Him and see how they feel.
I think what we ought to do is, clearly is just drag him in for violating something or other.
No, he's working. Let him get his work done.
Seriously. Any other thoughts that people haven't gotten out that they'd like to before we do the A word? Yes.
I just don't want to forget that the impetus for it is because there have been serious injuries, deaths, and so, for that reason, I think that it is very important to get, testimony and ask, tough questions.
One thought that occurs to me, it may not be possible, Sophie, when you look at the other states that are doing this, I would be curious if any of them are northern tier states, where they suffer cold.
So
And
we,
any of them are states with substantial rural populations and rural concerns.
so I sent this to you, April 29th after the hearing. So California, Colorado, Minnesota. So Minnesota theirs is applicable to indoor work sites, and it does cover heat exposure above 77 degrees for heavy work, 80 degrees for moderate work, 86 for light work. Cold exposure, 60 degrees for heavy work and 65 degrees for light to moderate work. And then Oregon and Washington are the other two, and they're outdoor ones. Oregon is indoor. But it's only heat, so it's indoor or outdoor when the heat index equals or exceeds 80 degrees Fahrenheit or 90 degrees Fahrenheit for.
Okay, well, let's look at that. I'm wondering I'm just thinking out loud, whether it wouldn't be good to get someone from one of these states, to come in via video, so we can frankly, I actually frankly confront them with some skepticism and see what they say.
Can I ask on the record, what is the difference between an administrative rule and statute?
Statute is what this would be.
Right,
It goes-
so what is an administrative
An
rule?
administrative rule
exactly?
is someone where you have an agency.
Yeah, it's not set by the legislature.
In other words,
So
let's say we
We
had,
wouldn't have to
No.
do that.
no, that's the whole idea. In other words, we would say, for example, we would say employers should ensure that employees are safe in a high heat, and extreme cold situations, period, or something like that. And then we would delegate to an agency the job of writing the regulations that would spell all that out.
Oh, so that makes sense.
Yeah, but the problem we have in Vermont, and lots of states do that.
Yeah,
The problem we have in Vermont is there's no one to delegate that to.
okay,
They just don't do it. There's not enough of them. They don't have the capacity.
Yeah.
We have we're a small state. We don't have the tax base, and we have much more limited, we just are coming to terms with who we really are that way. And some might argue that's good. Yes.
So since Wyoming is close to our population and it's rural, why don't we look at what their laws are?
Do they have any?
We don't.
Oh, Wyoming
Yeah,
doesn't?
Wyoming's pretty free.
This is true. It is, yes.
What was it? You said Minnesota. Is that what you meant?
Yeah.
No, I know Wyoming.
That was states that are rural? I like that.
Rural
and
and
northern.
also very, very similar in population to us.
Northern and
Vermont.
rural.
Yeah. No, mine would just be a general statement of, I find myself doing it from time to time as well, and I have to catch myself. I feel like we lose so much of a state's identity and what the intentional purpose was of the beginning of this entire 50 different examples of self-governance, when all we do is we're like, What'd Oregon do? Let's do that. What'd California do? And we seem to like pick 4 states and just do whatever they did. It
It's
just
a good idea.
genuinely wasn't the entire purpose at all of
I think
Well,
it's
if you'd
very-
rather know
the
it
creation of 50 state, 50 different.
First, if you'd rather be first at everything, then I've got some cool ideas for you.
I'd like us to just come up with stuff that works for us instead of being like,
I-
here's the template of what they did. What can?
No, we're
pick apart what-
I also think that Joe is giving his opinion
Mhm.
is absolutely fine.
I just struggle with it every time. It's always just some other state that we're like.
I would
just
respond by
copy what they
saying, actually, that I agree, that we have to carve our own road that works for us. We're a small state. I think that we just did that.
I think that.
We did that a few minutes ago when we stripped the certified payroll out. We stripped it out and for various reasons, but one of them is we do not have the same state government capabilities that some of the larger states around us have. And we weren't, I think we did it when we looked at the main system for a landlord port, remember a housing port? And we just felt like, well, it was just verbatim what they did in Maine, and we just felt like, maybe not. And I think that's a good thing. Yes, and then yes.
I think that looking at other states and if it's working for them, for just a frame of reference and make it our own is what we're trying to do, just be successful as a state, not to copy what other states do, but if it is beneficial and it is successful, why not look at what they have?
Just to find out what works for them and what didn't work and what would work for us and what wouldn't work for us.
Yes,
I just wanted to say, if we rewind the tape. Chair Mahali was saying, let's bring in one of these states that does it and really push them and be like,
Why?
you know, it wasn't like, let's invite another state to come in and speak to us to tell us what to do.
I'm just curious. I mean, it may be, it may not be truthful. I mean, it may be, I admit, even as I said it, I thought, all that's gonna happen is we're gonna get a regulator in here who's gonna tell us how wonderful their system is. I'm not sure I have to give more thought who we would talk to. But I am kind of curious, particularly since it seems to me I'm torn because I realize this is a modern regulatory regime. Period. I mean, lots of states do this. And yet I'm sitting here as someone who's had enough Vermont rub off on me in the last 25 years that I'm looking at it and going, say what? At the same, so I have these two, I'm just admitting I have these two sides of me. One is, yeah, this is modern regulation, sure. And then there's another part of me that's going, that's crazy for us. And so there's part of me, I'm curious about my reaction. And there's part of me, like, if I could just conjure up people, I'd like to talk to somebody, even in California. I mean, California has a lot of big rural areas, There's part of me that wants to talk to, I don't know, the Chamber of Commerce or somebody in California and say, well, how's that work? Does it work? Or do people just ignore it? Does it ever enforce? Those kinds of questions. But I admit it's kind of hard to do that. But let's start with the testimony and see how we go, okay? I think we're hearing a broad-based skepticism about this level of regulation for us, and we're just gonna have to craft our own way. And it's conceivable that we'll just abandon the process and decide it's not worth it. But let's take some testimony. Is that all right with everybody?
Mhm.
And see how it goes. Sophie, 1,000 thank yous for all the work that went into this. And I don't think it was wasted. I really don't. I'm not just saying that to be nice. I had, at least, even the part of me that said, oh my God, I don't think we can do this. I had to see it. I mean, it never occurred to me to think about it until I read this through. So I think it's obviously it's food for thought. It's getting people going.
Starting point.
Yeah.
Yeah, very helpful starting
Yeah,
point,
so-
and broken down really, really nicely. This is incredible.
I know, I don't know.
This is a whole
I
lot
mean,
of
So
there's-
that was more helpful than just.
A whole
going,
extra
like,
product.
through the whole thing.
Yeah.
Individual
I think
lines.
that's
starting with
impressive.
it is essential.
It's really useful,
Amazing.
really helpful.
Yes, that's the fun look at it.
I just don't ever remember seeing this kind of artwork when you were chancellor. Okay, any other thoughts? Tomorrow, we're starting at 10 a.m. Okay. And with testimony on this. For your information, something that Leonora knows and is delighted with
So delighted.
is that that 125 is not going to go to ways to appropriation. And therefore, she is going to be our star on the floor on Friday.
I don't have the weekend to prepare.
And,
I really hope I don't embarrass you all.
ChatGPT.
Oh, God.
But you'll enjoy the weekend.
and
Are we
also,
adjourned yet?
we're not.
Get it over with.
And that you
Think about
can't
it.
stay up too late on Thursday night. All right.
All right.